To the world, he is Captain America, the embodiment of justice, courage, and sacrifice. Chris Evans, with his chiseled jaw, piercing eyes, and quiet strength, became the very definition of a superhero. His face was plastered on billboards, his shield recognized in every corner of the globe. To millions, he was more than just an actor. He was the symbol of hope itself. But behind the shield, behind the flawless image of America's greatest hero, lies a very different man. Chris Evans almost turned down the role that made him famous. In fact, he said no more than once. Hollywood couldn't understand why an actor on the brink of stardom would hesitate to play Captain America. But Chris knew the truth. Fame terrified him. The endless spotlight, the pressure to be perfect, the fear of losing his identity. It wasn't the dream it looked like from the outside. And he was right to be afraid. With fame came anxiety, depression, and sleepless nights. While audiences saw a fearless warrior on screen, Evans was quietly battling his own demons off it. Panic attacks before press tours, the overwhelming weight of expectation, the constant worry that he would never truly escape the shadow of the shield. He was loved as Captain America, but Chris Evans himself often felt trapped by the very role that made him a legend. The boy from Boston, who once dreamed of acting, found himself in a nightmare of his own success. And the truth behind Chris Evans' rise to power is far darker than Hollywood wants you to believe. Long before Chris Evans carried the weight of a superhero shield, he was just a boy growing up in Boston, Massachusetts, a world away from the red carpets of Hollywood. Born on June 13, 1981, Christopher Robert Evans was raised in the quiet suburb of Sudbury, about 20 miles outside the city. His father, Robert Evans, was a dentist. His mother, Lisa, worked as a theater director and later as an artistic director for a youth theater. Creativity and discipline collided in the Evans household, giving Chris both structure and imagination. Chris was one of 4 siblings, and family life was always lively. His mother's passion for theater meant the Evans children were constantly surrounded by stories, performances, and the magic of the stage. Chris and his siblings often acted in school plays and community theater, encouraged to explore self-expression rather than hide it. Unlike the future superhero the world would know, Chris was shy, sensitive, and sometimes insecure. His parents divorced when he was a teenager, a fracture that left its mark on him. Though both remained present in his life, the split created instability, forcing Chris to grow up faster than he wanted. He later admitted that the family tension made him lean even harder on acting as an escape. On stage, he could step outside himself, channeling emotions that were difficult to process in real life. High school in Sudbury was formative. Chris wasn't a star athlete or the most popular kid, though he did enjoy wrestling and lacrosse, but where he truly shined was in the arts. Teachers noticed his sharp memory and natural charisma. He had the rare ability to inhabit characters fully, even in small productions. Acting wasn't just a hobby, it became his sanctuary, a way to turn vulnerability into strength. Summers were spent at theater camps, where Chris threw himself into plays with an intensity far beyond his years. Friends described him as warm and generous, but also restless, a young man who carried energy that needed to be directed somewhere meaningful. After graduating from Lincoln's Sudbury Regional High School in 1999, he followed his passion to New York City, enrolling at the Lee Strasberg Theater and Film Institute. It was there, among struggling actors and dreamers, that Chris sharpened his craft. He learned the discipline of method acting, the grind of auditions, and the humbling reality of rejection. But rejection didn't crush him. Chris had grown up watching his mother pour her life into community theater without fame or fortune. He understood that art was rarely about instant success. That perspective grounded him, reminding him to see acting as a calling, not just a career. To pay the bills, Chris worked odd jobs while hustling between auditions. He was cast in minor television roles, including appearances on shows like Opposite Sex, 2000. Though the parts were small, they gave him experience, connections, and the confidence that he could survive in the industry. Yet, despite his ambition, Chris was haunted by doubt. He had seen how Hollywood could swallow young actors whole, reducing them to stereotypes or discarding them after failure. He feared being typecast, or worse, forgotten. Those insecurities gnawed at him and would resurface years later when fame came knocking harder than he ever expected. Still, he pressed forward. Family remained a constant anchor. He leaned on his siblings, particularly his brother Scott, who also pursued acting. Their shared dreams provided encouragement during moments of struggle, and his mother's unwavering belief in his talent gave him the courage to continue, even when auditions ended in silence. By the early 2000s, Chris had built a modest resume. He wasn't a household name yet, but his natural charm and all-American looks caught the attention of casting directors. They saw in him something that audiences might respond to: a boy-next-door energy combined with the discipline of a trained actor. But underneath the surface, Chris Evans was still the sensitive boy from Boston, eager to prove himself, afraid of failure, and desperately searching for stability in a world that thrived on instability. He was on the verge of a breakthrough. Yet, the very qualities that made him compelling, his vulnerability, his honesty, his need for control, would one day clash violently with the unforgiving machine of Hollywood. The stage was set. Chris Evans was about to rise into the spotlight. But the higher he climbed, the more fragile the ground beneath him would become. Chris Evans' early years in Hollywood were marked by the familiar grind of auditions, rejections, and small victories. He landed bit parts in television shows and teen dramas, but his first real break came in 2001 with Not Another Teen Movie. The role was tongue-in-cheek, a parody of the high school jock archetype. With his good looks, athletic build, and sharp comedic timing, Chris fit the part perfectly. The movie was silly, filled with crude humor, but it worked. Overnight, Chris Evans became a recognizable face to young audiences. For many, he was the goofy, charming, pretty boy. For Chris, though, the success was bittersweet. He feared being boxed into superficial roles that showcased his looks but ignored his depth as an actor. Determined to prove he was more than a teen comedy stereotype, Chris sought out projects that would stretch him. He landed supporting roles in films like Cellular, 2004, where he played a young man trying to save a kidnapped woman, and London, 2005, where he dove into the raw emotions of a broken relationship. These smaller films didn't catapult him to stardom, but they showed flashes of range and ambition. Then came Fantastic Four, 2005. Cast as Johnny Storm, the Human Torch, Chris entered the world of comic book blockbusters for the first time. His performance was charismatic and fun, full of swagger and humor. Audiences loved him, and the film's box office success gave him global visibility. A sequel, Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer, 2007, cemented his reputation as a bankable young star. But even as he posed on red carpets and signed autographs, Chris Evans felt a gnawing discomfort. Fame was intoxicating, but it was also suffocating. The more his star rose, the more anxious he became. Hollywood demanded certainty and control, two things Evans struggled with. Behind his confident smile, he battled self-doubt, panic attacks, and the constant worry that he was being typecast once again, this time as the cocky, one-dimensional action hero. By the late 2000s, Chris Evans had built a solid resume, but he wasn't yet considered in the top tier of Hollywood actors. That was about to change in a way he couldn't have imagined. In 2010, Marvel Studios came calling. They wanted Chris Evans to play Steve Rogers, Captain America. On paper, it was the opportunity of a lifetime, a starring role in a major superhero franchise that promised global fame and financial security. For most actors, the answer would have been an immediate yes. But for Chris, the offer sent him spiraling. He turned it down, not once, but multiple times. The fear wasn't about playing a superhero. It was about what came with it. A multi-film contract that would tie him to the character for nearly a decade. The loss of privacy, the endless press tours, the crushing weight of being the face of a franchise. For someone already struggling with anxiety, the prospect felt unbearable. Chris later admitted that he worried the role would take away his freedom, trapping him in a spotlight he had never been comfortable with. Marvel, however, refused to let him go. Director Joe Johnston and producer Kevin Feige believed Evans was perfect for the role. They saw in him not just the physicality of Captain America, but the quiet vulnerability that defined Steve Rogers, the frail young man who became a hero not because of his strength, but because of his heart. At a crossroads, Chris sought advice from friends, family, and therapists. Some told him to walk away, others urged him to embrace the opportunity. Finally, after weeks of hesitation, he accepted. In 2011, Captain America: The First Avenger was released, and Chris Evans' life changed forever. The film was a hit, but it was The Avengers 2012 that launched him into the stratosphere. As Captain America, Evans embodied the spirit of selflessness and integrity in a cynical age. Audiences adored him. Children looked up to him. Fans around the world believed he was Captain America. But with the adoration came the very fears he had anticipated. Chris Evans was no longer just an actor. He was a symbol. Every interview, every appearance, every choice he made was measured against the moral compass of Steve Rogers. The line between the man and the character began to blur, and Evans felt the pressure more than anyone realized. For Hollywood, he had become a global superstar. For Chris Evans, he was living in a paradox. The dream he had chased since childhood was finally real, and yet it came with the nightmare of losing himself in the role that defined him. To the outside world, Chris Evans was living the dream. He was Captain America, the heart of Marvel's billion-dollar empire, a symbol of justice and sacrifice for an entire generation. His face was everywhere, on posters, in toy stores, on cereal boxes. Children looked at him as if he really was Steve Rogers, a hero who could do no wrong. But behind the shield, Chris Evans was unraveling. From the very beginning, Evans had known what the role of Captain America would mean: fame on a scale he had never experienced, endless scrutiny, the loss of anonymity. And for a man who had always been deeply private, who valued freedom above all else, it felt like a slow suffocation. As the Marvel films grew bigger, the Avengers, Captain America, the Winter Soldier, Civil War, so too did the pressure. Every premiere meant facing thousands of fans, flashing cameras, invasive questions. Every press tour meant weeks of being on, smiling, charming, performing, even when he felt like he couldn't breathe. Evans began suffering panic attacks before events, overwhelmed by the weight of expectation. He spoke openly, years later, about his struggles with anxiety. He described moments of waking up with dread, the thought of attending another red carpet filling him with nausea. Fame had given him everything he thought he wanted, but it had also stolen his peace. There was another layer of torment: the fear of being trapped. Evans had signed a multi-film contract, locking him into Marvel for nearly a decade. The very stability that most actors dream of, guaranteed work, guaranteed paychecks, felt like a prison to him. Each time a new film was announced, Evans wondered if he was losing more of himself, if his identity outside of Captain America was slowly disappearing. Hollywood, of course, celebrated him. Directors praised his professionalism. Co-stars adored him. To the public, he seemed effortless, the perfect embodiment of a noble leader. But Evans was constantly questioning whether he could keep going. More than once, he considered walking away from acting altogether. His personal life offered little refuge. Relationships were short-lived, often ending under the harsh spotlight of fame. tabloids obsessed over his romances, turning private struggles into public headlines. While Captain America was portrayed as the ideal man, Evans often felt he couldn't live up to the myth. He was flawed, insecure, searching for balance. But Hollywood didn't want Chris Evans, the man. It wanted Captain America, the legend. Social media only magnified the pressure. Every interview, every statement, every misstep was dissected online. Evans, who cared deeply about authenticity, often found himself second-guessing his words, worried about disappointing fans or sparking controversy. In an age where actors were expected not just to perform but to represent ideals, Evans carried the burden of being a hero off-screen as well. The physical demands of the role also took a toll. Years of intense training, strict diets, and grueling schedules left him exhausted. While audiences admired his physique, few understood the discipline and the strain it required. The body that symbolized strength was also a source of pressure, a constant reminder of the image he had to maintain. By the mid-2010s, Chris Evans was at the pinnacle of success and utterly drained by it. He described moments of wanting to run away, to retreat into obscurity, to escape the endless expectations. Fame, he realized, was not freedom. It was a cage made of adoration, and the higher he climbed, the tighter it closed around him. And yet, walking away was impossible. He was bound by contracts, by responsibility to fans, by the machine of Marvel that depended on him. He kept moving forward, film after film, smile after smile, even as anxiety gnawed at him behind closed doors. The irony was cruel. Chris Evans had become a global hero by playing Captain America, but in his private life, he was fighting a war no one could see. A war against panic, against depression, against the suffocating weight of fame. Hollywood crowned him a legend, but Chris Evans often wondered if, in becoming Captain America, he had lost himself. By the late 2010s, Chris Evans had become more than an actor. He was Captain America, the moral compass of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The steady hand in a chaotic world of superheroes. For nearly a decade, he carried the shield with grace, balancing nobility and vulnerability in a way that made Steve Rogers feel achingly real. But inside, Evans was nearing his breaking point. The Marvel machine was relentless. The shooting schedule stretched for months. The training was punishing, and the press obligations seemed endless. Evans delivered, film after film, The Winter Soldier, Civil War, Infinity War, but each success came with a heavier weight. He confessed in interviews that before major press tours, panic attacks would hit. The thought of being locked in hotel rooms, repeating the same answers to hundreds of reporters, filling him with dread. Then came Avengers Endgame 2019, the climax not just of the Marvel saga, but of Evans' career. The film was designed as a farewell, closing the chapter on characters who had defined an entire generation. For Chris, it was the moment he both longed for and feared. On screen, Captain America's story ended with grace. After years of sacrifice, Steve Rogers passed his shield to a new hero, finally choosing a quiet life over endless battle. It was the perfect ending. Poetic, noble, complete. In theaters, fans wept, standing to applaud as Evans' Captain America whispered those final words, "Avengers, assemble." Off-screen, Chris Evans was weeping too. Filming his last scenes, Evans admitted he was overwhelmed with emotion. It was more than just saying goodbye to a character. It was saying goodbye to the role that had defined him, the identity that had consumed him. Playing Steve Rogers, he said later, was the best decision I ever made, but it was also the scariest. For Evans, Endgame was both a triumph and a tragedy. The triumph was obvious. He had helped build the most successful film franchise in history, delivering a performance that would forever be etched into pop culture. He had proven his doubters wrong, silenced the critics, and left behind a legacy few actors could ever dream of. The tragedy was quieter, more personal. With Captain America finished, Evans was free. But freedom came with uncertainty. Who was Chris Evans without the shield? Could he ever step out of Steve Rogers' shadow? Or would he be trapped forever, remembered only as the man who once played a hero? There was also the toll of carrying that mantle for so long. Years of living as a global symbol had left him drained. Evans confessed that acting no longer brought him the same joy it once did. The anxiety that haunted him hadn't disappeared with his Marvel contract. If anything, it had grown sharper. He spoke openly about his struggles with depression, about the constant fear that he wasn't good enough, that he didn't deserve the pedestal the world had placed him on. Fans saw Captain America as fearless. Chris Evans, however, was a man terrified of failure, desperate to protect a fragile sense of self-worth in an industry that thrived on tearing people down. Endgame was his crowning moment, but it was also the moment he stepped away, unsure if he had the strength or the desire to keep playing the Hollywood game. In the years since, Evans has taken fewer roles, choosing projects more carefully, prioritizing his mental health. He found solace in activism, launching the political website A Starting Point to encourage civic engagement. He became more vocal about social issues, using his fame not just to sell movies, but to push for change. And yet, no matter what he does, Captain America lingers. Interviews still return to Steve Rogers. Headlines still frame Evans through the lens of Marvel. Fans still struggle to separate the man from the myth. The shield may have been put down on screen, but in the eyes of the world, it will always be strapped to Chris Evans' arm. That is the paradox of his career. The role that gave him everything also took something from him. The boy from Boston achieved a dream bigger than he could have imagined. But the cost was his peace, his privacy, and sometimes his sense of self. For Chris Evans, Endgame wasn't just the end of Captain America's journey. It was the end of his own battle to live up to an impossible image. And though he walked away triumphant, the scars of that fight will follow him long after the credits fade. Today, Chris Evans is remembered first and foremost as Captain America, a role that turned him from a promising actor into a global icon. To millions, he is the embodiment of courage and sacrifice, a symbol of what it means to fight for something greater than yourself. The image of him raising the shield in Avengers Endgame is destined to remain one of cinema's most powerful moments. But Chris Evans' legacy is not only about Marvel, it is about honesty. Unlike many stars who hide their struggles, Evans has been unflinchingly open about his battles with anxiety and self-doubt. He has shown fans that even those who play superheroes on screen are human, fragile, and searching for peace. In doing so, he redefines strength, not as invincibility, but as vulnerability. Beyond acting, Evans has used his platform for causes bigger than himself. With A Starting Point, he sought to bridge divides in American politics, encouraging people to engage with their democracy. He has spoken about equality, mental health, and the importance of empathy. In many ways, he has tried to live up to the ideals of Captain America, even as he wrestled with the weight of playing him. His story is not one of downfall, but of a man who dared to step away from the spotlight to protect his humanity. He will forever be Captain America in the hearts of fans, but his greatest legacy may be the reminder that behind every mask, every costume, every shield, there is a person who longs for the same things we all do: peace, acceptance, and the freedom to simply be himself. We loved him as Captain America. But behind the shield, Chris Evans remains a man, flawed, honest, and still searching for his place in the world.